Hey everybody, and welcome to video number 3 as part of my serve course. This is video 3 of 5, and it's going to be all about the racket drop. You might notice right above this video player there's some text that says previous course videos, and so you can use that to go back to the other videos if you haven't checked them out already. The first video is all about grip and stance. The second video is all about trophy pose, and this one's going to focus on the racket drop. Before we get to that, I wanted to address two questions that have been left in the previous two videos that I think were really good enough that it's worth sharing with everybody what the answers are. The first question, I've got my notes here, and Joe wrote and basically asked, he basically said, Ian, this is awesome, you're showing us all the serve footage from Nadal, Djokovic, Federer, etc., but which of these players should I copy? Which motion is the best for me to copy of the professional players that you're showing us? And the answer, Joe, is none of them. You shouldn't be taking one player and trying to emulate that whole motion, every little move and like stylistic thing and little idiosyncrasy. I've pointed out in the previous videos, and I'll continue to point out, differences. Different players have little different style things that they do with their service motions. And so when you go to improve your own service motion, you don't want to pick one player and copy every single little move that they make. Usually that's a recipe for disaster because we all have different bodies, we're all built differently athletically, we all have different natural tendencies, and so more than likely, those things are going to clash with whatever professional player you're trying to copy. What you want to do instead, and this is, I have purposefully been giving all the instruction in this course in this form and fashion. You want to take the similarities, the big things that every one of these players does the same or really closely to exactly the same, and those are the technique elements that you want to copy and try to create your own serve to do those technical elements as best as possible. So that's why I haven't just taken the Federer serve. Let's all learn from Federer's serve and copy Roger's serve. Roger's serve is awesome, obviously. He's got a great serve. But it would be a big mistake for me to say, okay, let's all copy Roger's serve, because he does some things that just don't work out naturally for me and won't work out naturally for you either. So long story short, take the big similarities, the similar technical elements that all these players have in common, and that's what you copy. Okay, so Joe, good question. And the second question, I didn't get the person who asked this, unfortunately. I tried to look back and find it, but I couldn't. But somebody asked a great question: how do we know if we're doing this right? And that's a great question, right? I'm going through and showing all of you what you're supposed to be doing with your service motion, what you should copy, what you shouldn't copy. And a lot of you have written in comments and said, I'm already practicing this, and that's awesome. But how do you know if you're actually doing it right? And the answer is video. Please use video. Video is such an incredible learning tool, such an incredible instructional tool, and it doesn't have to be a big fancy camera. If you have an iPhone or you have, whatever, it doesn't have to be an iPhone. Just about any smartphone that was made in the last 12 months has a pretty good camera on it, and good enough that you can see what you're doing. And you can transfer the video to your computer. And if I like to use QuickTime Player to be able to go frame by frame and check out exactly what I'm doing or what my students are doing. So do that. There's no other way to know for sure what the heck you're doing with your technique unless you actually watch it. So use video as you try to implement these different things that I'm teaching you guys during this course. All right, so with that, let's get right into the instruction. Again, today's video, number 3 of 5, is going to be all about the racket drop. I've heard other people online say that the racket drop isn't super important, and I don't think anything could be further from the truth. If it wasn't important, then you wouldn't see professional tennis players, both men and women, all do it, the racket drop that is, and you wouldn't see them all do it in a very similar way. We're going to go through and take a look at 5 different professional players here, one of them a WTA player, and we're going to take a look at how similarly all of these players do drop their racket, and I'm going to explain why it's so important. It's important, first of all, because it loads the shoulder up. And we're going to go through and discuss exactly what that means. But here we see Murray in his racket drop position. This is the very lowest point in his racket drop. What I mean by load the shoulder is it turns the shoulder back, it loads it up and prepares it to propel the racket up towards the ball. And that's a very important part of it, by the way. In the video right before this one, in the course where we talked about the trophy pose, I discussed towards the end of that video about how vertical a good quality serve is. And the racket drop here is just another indicator of that. You'll see all of the players that we go over today dropping the racket as low as possible. They achieve a full range of motion back behind themselves in dropping the racket. And part of that is the shoulder, part of that is also the forearm dropping back. You will see all of these players at least parallel to the court with their forearm. And that's a really good indicator for those of you watching at home to tell how good of a job you're doing loading your shoulder and dropping the racket is by looking at the angle of your forearm. If I'm not mistaken, and we'll see as we go through, I think all these players actually are lower than parallel to the court surface. And this is one of those things that I don't expect you to do as good of a job as the pros. If you can get close to parallel to the court surface with your forearm, then you're doing a really nice job. If you can, I mean, to be honest with you, I personally am right around parallel. I'm just about dead parallel with my forearm. Here we see Murray a little bit lower than parallel with his forearm. If you can get parallel, then you're doing a really nice job. So, importance of using the racket drop. It loads the shoulder, it gives you increased range of motion, vertical range of motion, so that we can accelerate the racket up towards the ball. And by doing that, we have more length of swing. If you've listened to my podcast, my free audio podcast, much at all, you know how important that I believe length of swing is. The more length of swing you have, the more room you have to accelerate the racket. And when you have more room to accelerate the racket, you can create more power and more spin, more racket head speed, which allows you to hit a higher quality shot. So let's just go through real quickly. Look at the 5 players. Here we see Murray with the racket drop. Look at the tip of his racket down below his butt. His racket is I guess towards the top of his thigh here, well below waist height, and his arm a little bit lower than parallel to the court surface. Next we have Djokovic. Djokovic really nice and flexible. Tip of his racket also about upper thigh, and his forearm also a little bit lower than parallel to the court surface. Here we have Verdasco looking from the back. Look at this. Verdasco is down almost at his left knee here. Pretty incredible range of motion here. Again, this is something I don't expect those of you watching at home to be able to copy anything like this. We're going over this just to see how good of a job the pros do. In fact, those of you watching at home, if you can get the tip of your racket down to waist height, then you're doing a nice job. In my experience, helping just your average club recreational player, if you can get the tip of your racket down to waist height, you're doing a nice job with the racket drop. Any lower than that is a bonus. I mean, you're doing a really nice job, and you have great flexibility with your shoulder and with your forearm. This is pretty incredible from Verdasco here. Next up, we've got Sharapova. From this angle, it's tough to see exactly where the tip of a racket is, but I would say it's upper thigh, kind of like with Djokovic and with Murray as well. And we can see her forearm is just about parallel to the court surface, maybe a little bit lower, but not a whole lot. Oh, I know we had one more. Yep, here we go. Here's Ryan Harrison. Tip of his racket about upper thigh. And he's got nice flexibility here with his shoulder as well. So forearm pointing down towards the court. He actually may be the most angled down towards the court here. And Harrison's got a big serve, by the way. When I was at Cincinnati, I saw him play. Who did he play? It must have been Djokovic. He played Djokovic and served big, and I think he just lost by a break in each set. He played pretty well, but Djokovic was obviously, the better player. So that gives you an idea of similarities between these different players. Let's go back to Murray here. And now I want to talk about the mistakes that recreational players make. And if you have a chance to videotape your own serve and the tip of your racket is not at waist height, if it's significantly higher than waist height, then you are very, very likely doing one of two things. Either your racket is just staying up to begin with and you're just not dropping it, and by the way, that kind of falls into kind of a subcategory. We've got two different causes of the racket staying up. And by the way, when the racket head stays up, and let's just take a look at how Murray gets to that position. Here's his trophy pose. And so from there, his arm, his shoulder really hinges, which lays that arm, that forearm back and gets him to that trophy pose position. Recreational players who don't get a full range of motion keep their racket up around this position. And that could happen really for one of two main reasons. It could be that your racket is opening, and that's a similarity that I want to point out. You will see that in the racket drop for all of these players, the racket is perpendicular to the player. It's on edge. So here's Murray, Djokovic. See how the racket edge is pointing towards Djokovic? Here's Verdasco. See how the edge is pointing towards Fernando? Sharapova, edge of the racket pointing towards her. And Harrison, edge of the racket pointing towards him. If you have a poor racket drop, it's very likely that your racket strings are facing up towards the sky instead of the racket being on edge. That's very common, and that's commonly referred to online as the waiter tray position, because you will see your palm also facing up. If you can imagine, a busboy or a waiter or a waitress coming out of the kitchen with a tray full of plates, with their palm facing up towards the ceiling, supporting that tray that's carrying all the plates on top of the tray. That's what you'll see. And you'll see here, check out Murray's hand facing towards the back of his head. Djokovic, palm, if he was going to open his hand, it would be facing towards the back of his head. Fernando, back of his head. Sharapova, if she were to open her hand, towards the back of her head. And Harrison, towards the back of his head. A colleague of mine, where I used to teach full-time in Bethesda, Maryland, used to call this brushing the hair, which I kind of liked, because it kind of reminds you to get in this position here with the palm facing towards the back of your head to, kind of an imaginary brush the hair kind of position. And if you have a continental grip, and now we're starting to get into the reasons why continental grip is important. All of these players are using at least a continental grip, if not even a little bit up towards bevel number 1. We talked about the grips in video number 1, grip and stance video. If you haven't seen that, go watch it. But this is where continental grip starts to come into play. And we're not going to get into the why, but this is a very, very important setup position with the racket, on edge and pointing down. In the next video, we're going to talk about exactly why getting it on edge is so vital. But the continental grip and getting the forearm and the hand in this position ultimately are what will lead to a good racket drop position. And of course, the shoulder has a lot to do with that as well. So it's kind of a three-part, team of effort here with your body to get the racket to drop. It's the grip and the palm facing the right direction. It's the forearm laying back around parallel to the court surface. And really the forearm laying back is the result of the shoulder going back as well. And kind of the loading, as I said before, the loading up of the shoulder. So how can you achieve all of this? Well, you have to have the right grip, first of all. You have to have your arm and your shoulder go back in the right position. And what makes that easiest is if you're relaxed and if you rotate your body upwards. Check this out. This is something else we're going to see in all 5 players. Here's Murray with his chest facing back towards the camera, like we talked about in the trophy pose video, video number 2 of this course. Now watch. He's going to rotate. He's going to initiate the turn of his body up towards the ball. Here's his racket drop. See how his chest is facing up towards the camera? And that rotation of his core from facing back towards the fence to up towards the ball helps initiate this drop of the arm, the loading of the shoulder, the drop of the forearm, and the drop of the racket. And watch, as he does this, his tossing arm trades positions. Here his dominant arm is low, his non-dominant arm is high. Now watch as his core rotates up, and now his dominant arm is starting to go up, and his non-dominant arm is starting to go down. I've heard this referred to as a cartwheel motion. You can kind of imagine an end-over-end cartwheel. So we've got high left arm, low right arm, chest facing back. As the chest rotates, his elbow and his dominant arm start going up, and since his arm is nice and relaxed, the racket drops in response to that. And as he does that, he starts to cartwheel end over end with his tossing arm coming down. See kind of the cartwheel motion that I'm talking about? And now we're starting to go up towards the ball. So racket drops as his dominant arm goes up. Racket is on edge and continues on edge up towards the ball. So let's check that out with these other players. Here's Harrison from the back. So here's the trophy pose, chest towards the camera. Now watch as his core rotates up. See how his chest is now facing up towards the ball. And now look, his left arm has started to cartwheel with his right arm. His right arm is starting to go up. His left arm has come down. And here's the racket on edge. The racket begins on edge back here. And as his core rotates up towards the ball and end over end, as his dominant arm starts to rotate up, since it's connected to his core and his core is rotating up towards the ball, and eventually his core is going to be facing forwards, that's the cartwheel motion, his racket stays on edge up towards the ball. And this, again, very, very closely related to the grip that you have. If you currently use an Eastern forehand grip on your serve, then at this point in your serve, you will see your racket strings facing up instead of the racket being on edge. And this is, if you want a high level serve, this position right here is vital. And we're going to discuss this in detail in the next video. We're not going to get into it right now, but just know for right now that this is a vital part of a good, high-quality service motion. And it starts with the grip. All right, next up, Sharapova. So here's her trophy pose. Right arm low, left arm high. Then they start to cartwheel as her core rotates up. Now her chest is facing up towards the ball. Left arm coming down, right arm coming up. Here's the racket drop, racket on edge. Racket still on edge on its way up towards the ball, still on edge. Okay? And we're not going to go any further than that today. We'll go further than this in the next video. Here's Verdasco. Trophy pose. Opposite arm up, dominant arm down. Verdasco is incredibly ripped, by the way. And then as he starts to cartwheel up, check out his chest facing up. Non-dominant arm coming down as his dominant arm is coming up. Here's the racket drop, the racket on edge. Racket still on edge, going up towards the ball. 90 degrees to the court surface. And continental grip. Again, if he had an Eastern forehand grip, you would see his strings facing up and down instead of right and left. Okay, so there's Verdasco. And then lastly here, Djokovic. So trophy pose, I really like this trophy pose. Nice, straight, vertical line up towards the ball. Non-dominant arm high, dominant arm low. Starts to cartwheel here, chest facing up towards the ball. His non-dominant arm is dropping, his dominant arm is raising. And along with, again, the shoulder, the arm, the hand, the wrist being relaxed, that's what really gets the racket dropped down here, is that rotation of the core upwards, and that's what really helps load the arm and shoulder back. That's important to point out, by the way. If you're relaxed, if you're loose and relaxed, and you just allow the racket to flow, listen, I'm not saying that this is just going to happen automatically, okay? If you're currently doing something very different from this, it's going to take some conscious effort and some conscious repetition to, some deliberate practice is a phrase that's been thrown around a lot recently. It's going to take deliberate practice to learn how to do this. But eventually, this dropping of the racket, the loading of the shoulder should happen very naturally as a result of being relaxed and the core rotating up towards the ball and creating this cartwheel effect with the two arms. So here's the racket drop, chest facing up, and then continuing that cartwheel effect, non-dominant arm low, dominant arm now high, and racket coming up on edge. Isn't it funny how similar? Let's go just to that position here. On edge, on edge, on edge, on edge, and on edge. Isn't that interesting? You will not see a professional player not be in this position. And this is probably, I mean, if I had to rank, this would definitely be in my top 3 biggest differences between recreational players and professional players. Recreational players, on average, again, their face is open, very open at this point in time during the motion. Their racket strings are facing straight up. And yet the pros accelerate a lot faster than rec players do, but they're still on edge, very, very near to contact. This is a split second before contact. Djokovic is still on edge. Now, how does that work in actually hitting the ball? It seems like he's going to hit the ball with the edge of the racket here. That's not going to happen. In the next video, I'm going to talk about exactly why. Okay? So that brings me to an end of the discussion of the racket drop. Really, really, really important stuff from the trophy pose that helps us get good range of motion with the arm and the shoulder and the path of the racket. It gets us a nice vertical setup below the ball. Again, serves a very, very vertically aligned and vertically directioned swing. I'm not sure if that's correct grammar, but you get what I'm saying. It's a very vertical swing, and this is just part of that. And the cartwheeling end over end, using the core to begin in a vertical alignment up towards the ball with the non-dominant arm, and then having the arms trade places so that here we have the dominant arm high, the non-dominant arm low. That's just a big part of the vertical nature of a good serve. And as a result of that, and having a nice loose arm and shoulder, the racket drops low. On edge, very, very important. That's a result of having a good continental grip. And then the racket continues on edge up towards the ball. So hopefully this all makes sense. And again, just like I've mentioned in previous videos, videotape yourself and compare yourself. We just went through 5 totally different players. One of them, a WTA player. We've got men and women here, different styles, different types of games, but they're all hitting these positions very, very, very similarly. So that should be a very strong indicator to you that this is really important stuff. And as with other things I've pointed out, I'm not expecting those of you watching at home to hit all of these exact same angles. I'm not expecting you to get as low with the tip of your racket or as low with your forearm. I don't expect you to have the same range of motion or flexibility as these professional athletes, but you should be trying to get closer to these positions. Again, if the tip of the racket is around waist height, you're doing a great job. If it's significantly higher than that, then take a look at what I'm pointing out here, and you can make some great improvements to your own serve. Thank you so much for watching video number 3 in my serve course. I really appreciate having you as a viewer, and I hope this video has been helpful to you. If you have any comments or questions at all, please leave those right below this video player. I really look forward to hearing from you. And I want you to keep an eye on your email inbox over the next couple of days. Probably about a week from now, you'll receive video number 4. And it'll be the same kind of subject line that has been used up until now. It's going to say serve course video number 4, and that's going to be talking all about contact points. So far we've talked about grip and stance, we've talked about trophy pose, we've talked about racket drop. That was just today's video. Next up is contact. Obviously a really important element if you want to be a good server in tennis. So look for that. And in the meantime, if you've appreciated these free videos, please share them with your friends, family, teammates, whatever. There's the Facebook, Twitter, and email button right below this video player. And I'd really appreciate you spreading the word about this free course. So until next time, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it. Leave your comments and questions below, and I'll be talking to you again soon.